Well, I'm going to throw a loaded question at you for tonight. Chew on this one for a second. Is South Africa making progress in the fight against corruption? It is Africa Anti-Corruption Day. Well, legal and development practitioner Karabo Mokgonyana and Nyasha McBride Mpani from the Institute for Justice and Reconciliation believe all is not as it should be. Well, let's welcome them both to the show. Good evening to both of you, and I appreciate your time. Nyasha, let me begin with you, if you don't mind. Let me come to you first on my right-hand side. I don't get a sense we actually are on top of this, or actually, as a country, we know what's going on. Would you agree or disagree? Let me just stop you. I think you might be muted, Nyasha. Just hit that unmute button for me quickly.
Sorry, Gareth. Thank you so much, and I'm excited to be on your show. I do agree that we are not on the right track in terms of corruption, because if I were to look at the figures that were released by the Afrobarometer survey data on South Africa sometime last month in May, you find that 82% of South Africans, they strongly believe that corruption has increased in the previous year. And these figures, they actually indicate that all is not well when it comes to corruption. You also find that only 10% of South Africans believe that the government is doing well in the fight against corruption, which is quite lower than the average in terms of when we look at other African countries where the average is 30%. So I agree with you that all is not well when it comes to South Africa in fighting corruption.
And now, of course, Karabo, let me ask you the most loaded question of the evening. Nyasha, come back to me on this one afterwards if you want. Why are we where we are? It's all yours. Karabo, why are we where we are?
Good evening, Gareth, and good evening to your viewers. Definitely a loaded question. I think it speaks to a lot of the institutionalization when it comes to the gaps that exist and the loopholes that exist within institutions to make sure that there are none of these irregularities or mismanagement of any sort of finances, or just in terms of how a lot of our institutions operate. So firstly, it's institutional, but at the same time, I think we can go as far as saying within South Africa, you could even say we've normalized it. It's no longer a shock now that we actually have institutions that are breaking down, but also we have leadership that is not necessarily willing to be accountable. So I think our society generally, in terms of accountability, we are really not strong in that. And that goes as far as starting with our own leaders who are unable to really be accountable individually. So then how do we expect a society holistically to be accountable from just institutions, from community level as well? So we are seeing a really big breakdown because there's weaknesses within our legal frameworks, there's weaknesses within the institutions themselves, but there's also a lack of financing. So if you're going to create all these 100, whether it's commissions, task teams, you need to make sure you resource them, but you need to capacitate the people that are actually implementing those things. And we are really lagging behind in relation to that.
Yeah, Karabo, so from a legal and development practitioner, I was wondering if you were going to go there about getting commissions to be accountable and have the money to host commissions correctly as well. But also, Nyasha, I saw you busy nodding your head as well. I can't help but think from a justice and reconciliation perspective, where do you begin to try and close the loop on this? Because we've had state capture commissions, we've had arms deal commissions. It's not exactly setting a great example for how South Africa handles corruption in our country. Someone comes to you, maybe it's the Chief Justice, and says, all right, Nyasha, you tell me what I need to do. What do you tell justice and reconciliation? What's your solution?
From my point of view, I think the issue is about political will, is what Karabo has said. Because if you want to fight corruption, I think we need to fight the issue of retaliation. Because if you look at the studies by Afrobarometer, they indicate that 72% of South Africans, they strongly believe that if they fear reporting corruption because of retaliation. So having that fear in citizens, it means that we are not going anywhere in terms of corruption. Citizens will just keep quiet in terms of trying to fight corruption. Even if they see it, they will normalize it, as what Karabo has said, that we have normalized corruption in South Africa. So I think it starts by political will to have citizens do not have that fear of reporting corruption if they see it. And also when the political will is there, it can be able to plug in and to put in strong measures that can address corruption in South Africa.
Karabo, I feel like Nyasha and I are lining you up this evening. I mean, here's another loaded question for you as well. So as I throw the legal framework back at you, as he says that we need to try and create an environment where we're willing to report corruption as well. Do you get a sense we're anywhere near that as a country at the moment? Do we as citizens feel safe to do that? And if not, I imagine that's your answer. If not, how do we begin to do that?
Yeah, it's definitely my answer. I think, there are quite a few examples in South Africa where whistleblowers just have not been protected. And it's such a big reflection of how we do not have a good legal and regulatory system in place to ensure, firstly, protection of whistleblowers, but also to ensure that once these things are reported, what happens next? So there's always loopholes. People start getting, violated, people disappear. And that speaks to a lack of, the strength of the institutions that are meant to really implement that. So we're talking about your police services, we're talking about your IPID, we're talking about a lot of these institutions. There is always a loophole. And unfortunately, we go as far as having institutions that are very vulnerable to money. Money talks for a lot of these institutions. If you do not have money to bribe or to, make them decide in a specific direction, you as a person who's vulnerable, who is quote unquote a nobody, that's why we start seeing people disappear, because you don't have the relevant power to make the decisions and you're going against very strong people. So what protections are there for you? There's really little. And I think this speaks to a big gap in the legality in terms of the implementation and protecting whistleblowers, but also who is implementing that? Are these institutions capacitated to do that? But also, are they then accountable? Because it speaks to a lack of accountability, and hence why, there are so many of loopholes when it comes to just the implementation and just the lack of policies.
Yeah, and Nyasha, I think Karabo is pretty much doing my job for this evening. Let me come back to you. She's asked some good questions as well. Does the justice framework, does the legal framework protect whistleblowers? Is it giving them a sense of confidence to come forward? People are disappearing. We've reported this. People are dying if they come forward as well. What's currently in our framework and how much better can we get at this? It's two very good questions from Karabo. What would your response be?
Definitely, there are some mechanisms which the government have put in place in trying to fight corruption, like the setting up of the SIU, like also the enactment of the PCCA Act. But the issue is that citizens have lost trust in public institutions. You find that 65% of citizens do not trust the presidents. We've got 63% of citizens do not trust MPs who are supposed to put in place laws that can deal with corruption. So this can actually tell you that when we have got citizens no longer trusting their institutions, we are not doing anything in terms of fighting corruption. So there is need for these institutions to gain public trust. Once public trust is gained in these critical public institutions, then we can be able to start talking on how best can we deal with corruption. Because if the head is rotten, like as you can see that 65% say they don't trust the president. So how much can citizens trust if the president is to say, I'm putting in place such a measure to fight corruption, when they strongly believe that the president is corrupt?
Yeah, it's such a good point, and I really hope I get a chance to talk with both of you, because I feel like we could talk for an hour, if not longer. So I'm going to say goodbye to both of you, and I really appreciate your time. It's almost as Karabo was doing my job for me this evening. Legal and development practitioner Karabo Mokgonyana and Nyasha McBride Mpani from the Institute for Justice and Reconciliation, throwing out some fascinating stats about sentiment and who is trusting who here in South Africa. My thanks to both of them for making time this evening.